Recognizes Mr. Edwards of North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Sheffield, in opening comments, I heard that inflation since Joe Biden had been our president had increased. I heard somebody testify 16.6%. I heard somebody testify 17.1%. What are folks, and I also heard testimony that the additional cost for many of the things that people have to buy now is being financed on their credit cards. What is what's the long-term effect of $1 trillion in credit card debt? Where are we headed?
It's extremely corrosive to building intergenerational wealth, to have, especially rollover balances from month to month and having to pay these very high interest rates. So it becomes this hole that you can't dig out of, and that's really the hole that is the fruit of Bidenomics, to pile on consumer debt onto families. In terms of housing, I think it's important because housing is, quite often the largest budget chunk of the family budget. First of all, the redlining was created by FDR, a racist administration. The FDR New Deal program was the one that created redlining, so that's very, very important to just historically put on the record. But when it comes to housing supply, if you talk about St. Louis and other cities, the vast majority where these urban pockets of constriction of housing supplies are constricted, they're run by Democrat regulation. They're run by progressive policies that constrict the supply of housing. So if you want to have more housing supply, you need to have zoning regulation that is more competitive. And unfortunately, these areas where the worst housing supply constrictions occur are in progressive areas. And so I would say that that is my recommendation in terms of improving housing supply. The other massive increase in inflation is energy. And so we see just recently, within the last couple weeks, the Biden administration, again, saying we are going to constrict drilling in Alaska and other areas of the United States. Who wins in this scenario? It's OPEC that wins. It's Russia that wins. And so it's so counterproductive for U.S. taxpayer dollars to go and fund to fight the Ukrainian war against Russia. Meanwhile, Joe Biden is here domestically constraining our own domestic oil prices and hitting families over and over.
Thank you for that. So with inflation hitting the American household, and we heard a couple different numbers there. I'm going to round it off to $5,000 a year. What are folks doing without? How are their purchasing habits changing? Because surely most of us could agree that when we're looking at 17% inflation, the harm, most of the harm falls on working class families and the poor, because much of their disposable income is being eradicated by inflation. And I think that would be a concern to all of us in this room. So how are they coping? What are they doing without?
Sure, I would say it's the poor as well as retirees as well, where typically when you retire, it is one of your highest peak net assets or net worth. But unfortunately, because of Bidenomics and what's happened with inflation, the net worth of many seniors living on fixed income is incredibly tight. And so you're seeing grandparents having to forego vacations or forego helping with their grandchildren's education. You're seeing people actually just dropping out of the education situation altogether, especially young men just not even going to college because it is so expensive. And unfortunately, the Biden administration's plan on student loans is so counterproductive. It does nothing to actually address the root cause of inflation in education. It simply takes the U.S. tax money and subsidizes the wasteful policies that are being held at the university instead of actually holding the university accountable for the rise in inflation for student tuition. So you're seeing people forego education. You're seeing them having to intergenerational, housing, people within the same, family, grandparents and living together, which, could be good or bad depending on the family dynamic. But yeah, people are making do. But unfortunately, as I said earlier in my opening statement, I believe it was 52 or 54% of families reporting, according to CNBC, reporting that they're dipping into their savings to pay for groceries and to pay for everyday expenses like rent. That is deeply unsustainable, and it is the fruit of Bidenomics.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'll yield.